Hello, Ethan. How are you today?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. I was reading an article on LinkedIn called Open BIM versus Closed BIM. This is from the BIM Engineers newsletter. And they were
Mm-hmm.
talking about the differences between closed BIM and open BIM,
Yeah.
building information modeling, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say, I didn't think there was anything to discuss. I thought that if BIM wasn't open, then it wasn't BIM.
All right. Can you tell me about what is Open BIM and what is Closed BIM so that people can understand?
Okay, so well, let's start with closed BIM. So the idea of closed
Mhm.
BIM, we're talking about building information modeling. That is the digital representation of our buildings and our projects, not just buildings, but landscaping as well. So for example, there is a CAD program, there is a BIM program, Revit, owned by Autodesk. I've heard people say that the only BIM program to use is Revit.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm not sure whether Autodesk promotes it in that way, but the idea of saying the only program you can use that is BIM is this particular program. And the challenge with that is that it requires the engineers to use it, the mechanical engineers to use it, the geotech engineers have to use the same program, and the architects are using the same program as well, so that everybody's using the same program to share model information. Now, the challenge with that is what happens if in 5 years' time that program is no longer the one to use? All the files made with that program can't be easily shared with other people. Now, Open BIM, on the other hand, is that we should have a facility for me sharing my file with you, regardless of what program I'm using.
Mm-hmm.
So I love using Vectorworks, as you probably know. And one of the jobs I had once, there was a company in Auckland that made permanent formwork. You know, in
Mm-hmm.
commercial buildings, you sometimes get that permanent formwork for
Yeah.
flooring,
Yeah.
and it's got the studs that stick up, and they cast the concrete on top. So they would get from the engineer the IFC, the Industry Foundation Classes, that's what it stands for. They would get the IFC model of the structure, and they would then use Vectorworks to put their flooring trays on top of it. And it worked really well. I built them a system
Mm-hmm.
that allowed them to count up the number of flooring trays. They could
Mm-hmm.
quantify the number. We actually had the weight on each one as well. So when there was a full tray, we knew how
Mm-hmm.
much that weighed. And so my
Yeah,
report would count up all the weight of all the trays for the entire building, so they'd know how many trucks they need.
I see.
The idea was that the engineer could share the model with that person. That person could then use another program to do that part of the job, the permanent shuttering or the permanent floor work. And then if they needed to, they could then send the IFC file back to the engineer. So the engineer would have those trays and the layout of those trays on his engineering file. Now, to me, that's Open BIM, where you can share the information between each other. Even
Yeah.
better for Open BIM would be a single file stored on the cloud where everybody could contribute to that. So you could actually go to that location, grab the IFC file for the engineering and put your file back, but it would all be bound into one single file, one single CAD model.
Okay, so you explain about theory with the actual example. Okay, I'm a bit curious. So you talk about store in the cloud. Since IFC you can use for multiple format, multiple software. So what cloud did you use in that project?
We didn't actually use the cloud. I was just saying that would be the ideal thing, would be to have a single
Okay.
location to store it.
Hmm.
But in the example I was giving you, the engineer would send their IFC file, the flooring contractor could import it
Hmm.
and could see the
Yeah.
flooring. So it was actually a 3D model. So they could see the
Yeah.
entire structure of the building in 3D. They could put all
Hmm.
their flooring trays on the building and they could turn the building in 3D and see all around it. I don't
Yeah.
think the structural engineer wanted the file back, but I was just saying that was an example where you could
Yeah.
send that
So
information back. And to me, that's
um,
open BIM, this intersharing of information.
maybe put it in a private server or maybe in a cloud
Yeah.
situation. That should be fine. Another question is, since this is we are talking about actual applications. For one guy's maybe using ArchiCAD, another company will be other software, right? Vectorworks, or another guy will be using, okay, three companies, one ArchiCAD, another one will be using Vectorworks, and other guys will be using Revit.
So how would it work, did you say?
That's IFC files, Open BIM, right?
Yeah.
So three companies using three different software, which is popular as Revit and ArchiCAD and Vectorworks. Right,
Yeah.
three. So three companies using the same. They are different software, and the one in the server is IFC file. So can they work?
I don't know if the one on the server is the IFC file, because what happens is that so somebody has to own the master file. So let's say, for example, it's the ArchiCAD file as the master.
Yeah.
So they then have a mechanical engineer using Vectorworks and a structural engineer using, let's call it Revit. So we've got a structural engineer using Revit. So the architect will export their IFC model from ArchiCAD to both the structural engineer and the mechanical engineer. Now, those, I'm not sure what it looks like when you import into Revit, but I know in Vectorworks, when you import the IFC model, the IFC objects remain IFC objects. So you can look at it, you can say, okay, that's a wall, it's an IFC object type wall, it's got a door in it, I can see the size of the door, I can measure the door. So I can use the entire IFC model from ArchiCAD as background information to design my mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
Then I can export my IFC model of the mechanical engineering only, because I don't need to export the ArchiCAD information, I've already got it. So I export that, and the architect can then import the IFC model from Vectorworks and see it integrated into his ArchiCAD file. Then the structural engineer needs to export the IFC model of the structure. The architect with ArchiCAD should be able to import that structure, and we should then be able to see the interrelationship between the ArchiCAD file and the mechanical engineering and the structural engineering file.
I see.
Now, there is a program called Liberating, which will allow you to import IFC models from different people and look for clash detection. So it will then look through the architecture and the structural engineering and the mechanical and put all these together and show where the mechanical engineering conflicts with the structure and highlight that so that the architect can then get a meeting together to resolve that issue.
I see.
So Celebri Model Viewer is one of those things that you could use for looking at the entire model and bringing all the parts together. But from a contract documentation point of view, you still need to have an architect that's got a single point of reference, a master model. I saw a chat on LinkedIn recently where somebody was saying, what happens when you've got two people with the CAD model, with the BIM information? You've got two who both say that it's up to date. And my answer to that was, there's a leadership missing here, because the leadership should be in charge and say, this is the master model and this is how we use it.
Yeah, it should be single source of truth, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, a single source of truth.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I have another question. Okay, another question would be the contractual, because this is based on about maybe 7 years ago, I involved in a project which is use BIM. At the time, the project was using Revit, and there was so many people using it's more different parties, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, structural engineer, and architects, right? And also the contractors, so consultants and the contractors and the clients organizations, which he will be taking over as the facility manager, right? So because it's a pilot government project, so what happened is, for contractually, since the pilot, not everybody's really understand what they will be doing, so the versions of the file have to be, they have to agree who will be holding master file, they have to something like that. So I think for now we are more and more mature about BIM knowledge, so we can upfront agree that okay, we'll be using IFC file, which cloud or which server they want to store it, how they want to collaborate it. So that can be in the contractual documents. So that's what I think of after what you mentioned.
I think it's really important that there is a single source of truth, a single point of truth, but
Yeah.
also that there is some leadership, management of that single model, because
Yeah.
I don't know how Revit works with checking out parts of a single model to work on them. But at that point, there should be some leadership. I know in Vectorworks, when we set up project sharing, you can set up preferences to allow control over who can change certain things. So, for
Yeah.
example, only the structural engineer can change the structure.
Yeah. We
That
can have a
we've
BIM
got,
management team.
yeah, so you
BIM
end
manager
up with a
role.
BIM management team, so that
Yeah.
you end up, this staff is only allowed to change these resources, and they're not allowed to
Yeah.
change those ones. And so that, to me, would be a way to do it. But in that Revit project file and in the Vectorworks project file, we're still talking about a closed BIM system, because we're still talking about one software being in charge of the entire project. But some CAD programs allow you to export your file to old versions. So one CAD program I know really well only allows you to export to the last 5 years. Some CAD programs don't allow you to export to any of the old versions. Now,
I'm aware
that's
of
a
that.
real challenge, because not only is it a closed BIM system, but you've also prevented people with the same software, but a different version, being able to see your file.
Yeah,
And to me, that's a super closed system. And
yeah, it is very challenging, because some project are involved. It's spent for 5 years, and we have to think about what versions we will use, and we need to stick with it, because the project will last for 5 years. So we don't know what will happen in next 5 years, right?
exactly.
So
I've worked on projects
that's
that
really
last 5
challenging.
years. I've
Yeah,
worked on
that's
projects that
really
last 10 years. So to me, if you ask me to summarize everything, my answer is that one of the main tenets of BIM is interoperability. And that means an open system. It has to be an open system. Otherwise, in my mind, it's not true building information modeling. So I did get out my book. I got out my textbook this morning to have a quick read before we got started. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
the big one, well, and with no pictures in it. It's hard reading, but it's a great book to read if you really want to understand. It's called The BIM Handbook, a guide to information modeling for owners, managers, designers, engineers, and contractors. And I admit that I've got an old version of the book. I read this book a long time ago, and I've got all my comments in the margins of the book, and I'm surprised to find that some of them are still really thoughtful. The tenets of this are that it should be an open system. Otherwise, it's not true building information modeling, because in 5 years' time, what is the owner of the building going to use to look at the model?
Yeah.
In 10 years' time, when that building gets altered, what software is going to be used to edit the model? And if your software can only read the current version, and now our files are 10 years old, then what?
Yeah, it's quite challenging within the project. Just
You know,
imagine our City Rail Link Auckland. Its project has been spent for 10 years.
I don't know if I ever told you the story, Ethan, but recently the London Underground opened a new rail. It's now called the Elizabeth Line. Now, in its design phases, it was called Crossrail, and it was a new train line that would go from one side of London to the other, across London. And it was buried deep to get underneath all of the other stuff, because there's loads and loads of stuff under London. So when did I first hear about Crossrail? When I was working in London. And that's nearly 30 years ago that I was working in London. And it was probably 5 years before I left London. So it was probably 35 years ago I first saw Crossrail starting, and it opened, last year or the year before. So think about it. That's a 30-year project, and we're going to talk about what CAD software or what BIM software we're going to use to model that thing over all that period. Have computers changed much in that time?
Yeah.
Has our software changed much in that time? Now, there is software, there is a CAD program that doesn't change the file format. I don't know if you know, MicroStation.
Yeah, I use it.
They don't change the file format. Every year they
Mm-hmm.
may update MicroStation, but they never change the file format. That would allow open use of that software. But again, you need to have a DGM. It's got to be a MicroStation to read it and all that sort of stuff.
In Singapore, when we built train stations, we called it MRT stations, mass rapid transit stations, and the CAD software the government use is MicroStation.
So back to your thoughts. What do you reckon? Open BIM or closed BIM?
Open BIM, easily.
Why?
Yeah, because it's future proofing and better collaborations. Yeah.
So my conclusion is open BIM, there isn't anything else. Because it's not BIM if it's not open.
All right, cool. All right.
Hey, don't forget to subscribe to us on Spotify. It's the best place to listen to our podcast, The Architectural Technologist. Thanks for listening.
Bye.